Hello, everyone. Recently, I've been thinking about something, and new experiences are very exhilarating, so I figured I might as well share my thoughts here. It's actually a bit of an unusual train of thought for me personally because, well, let me just preface by saying that I am a dualist. That's right, I believe in the concept of using pistols at the crack of dawn to solve all. No, wait, that's a different form of duel. Obviously, if you know anything about philosophy, then what you know I meant is that I believe that the mind is separate from just the brain. They are distinct and segmented aspects, but not all that is the brain is the mind. And specifically, I go against the idea of that I've seen from lots of materialists that say that the mind is just what brains do. But just because I hold to dualism doesn't mean I'm not capable of thinking about this from another perspective. But to get to my point, I will need to bring together a couple of other concepts before I tie them all together for you. So the first point should be fairly straightforward. I think we all agree. When we think about the material world that we inhabit, it's obvious that almost all of our matter is interchangeable. Now, specifically what I mean by that is, suppose that you have an atom of oxygen and it's bonded with two atoms of hydrogen. Almost all of us would immediately recognize that we have a molecule of water. That's clear from chemistry. Suppose, however, that I take this molecule of water, and we'll just imagine I'm holding it here. I reach up and I pluck off the oxygen and I throw it over there and I grab a different oxygen atom and I put it back into this molecule. What has happened? Well, we still have a molecule of water. The fact that we switched one oxygen atom with another one does not change anything about the chemistry of the molecule of water. It doesn't change the boiling point. It doesn't change the freezing point. Nothing has changed. It doesn't alter any of the attributes of the compound of water by switching out the atoms. So for all intents and purposes, an atom of oxygen is an atom of oxygen is an atom of oxygen. And it doesn't matter what specific atom is involved in any particular formula that you're using for chemistry. This brings me right to the second point, which is that this kind of turns all of the existence of matter into a variation of the Ship of Theseus. Now, the Ship of Theseus refers to an ancient Greek thought experiment wherein a ship owned by King Theseus is out on the open seas and some of the planks get damaged, so they are replaced. A little while later, some more planks are damaged and those planks are also replaced, and so on, until eventually the entire ship has been replaced. The question then is asked, if every single plank on the Ship of Theseus has been replaced, is it still the Ship of Theseus, or is it a brand new ship that looks like the Ship of Theseus? Now, we can link those 2 points rather easily, of course, using the water molecule once again. Human beings are composed of a lot of water. If we were to replace every single water molecule in our body with a brand new water molecule, would you still be you? The immediate answer that we'd probably give is yes, of course. I mean, we'd still be us, obviously. In fact, we replace much, if not all, of our water throughout our lifetime a lot of times. Every time you take a drink of water and you go to the bathroom, you are replacing water molecules in your body with something else. So we clearly have not become different people just by that process, have we? Have we? Well, let's just set that aside for a moment and think of the implications of this whole process. What we are essentially saying is that while we are comprised of atoms, it's not the atoms we are comprised of that is relevant to who we are. Rather, it is the pattern of the atoms inside of us. Thus, we can take the same atoms, or we can take the atoms, move them out and put a same one in and replace it, and we'd still be in the same pattern. Specifically by the pattern, I mean it's the structure of how the atoms relate to each other. It's how the atoms are built upon one another, like a network of atoms, for example. Replacing the individual atoms with another individual atom doesn't change the structure at all, any more than replacing a plank on the Ship of Theseus changes the pattern of the ship into a rocket. So keep that in mind, and let's bring in another aspect here. It's a somewhat common trope in science fiction to have teleportation devices, which break the human body down into energy, beams that energy to another location, and then reconstructs the atoms in exactly the same pattern as before. So if this is the case, that it's not the individual atoms that matter, that but instead the pattern that matters, then breaking a human down and recreating them in another location would transfer the identity of the person with them. The pattern is still present. It's just moved from one location to another. And it really doesn't matter if you got the right oxygen in the right order. Thus, if Captain Kirk is beamed off the Enterprise to the surface of Vulcan, then it's still Captain Kirk who is on the planet. Now, I'm obviously not the first person to come up with the concept I'm speaking about in this. In fact, nothing of what I'm talking about here is unique to my own creation. But if this is so with the transporter beam, if it is the pattern being moved from one place to another, then the reality is one doesn't even need to actually disintegrate the person in one location before you build them in another. If Captain Kirk remains on the Enterprise, but steps on the transporter beam, or that goes to the transporter room, and the transporter just copies the entire structure of his body and recreates it on Vulcan, then both versions of Captain Kirk would exist simultaneously. More to the point, both would feel like they are the real Captain Kirk as soon as they both exist. They do have different timelines. They start diverging from each other immediately, and thus they are distinguishable as soon as they are in two different locations. And therefore, they're definitely not the same people anymore, but the pattern is now in two locations. So does the identity go with the pattern? Now, another reason why this works so effectively as a plot in science fiction is because we can ask a simple question. Rather than duplicating Captain Kirk, as we just did, when he gets dissolved on the transporter platform, does he literally cease to exist and then a new Captain Kirk springs into existence on Vulcan, completely with all his memories because those were part of his brain and the pattern there? But does the original Captain Kirk get obliterated? Or to expose the reality of what I'm meaning by this, let's think of the Prestige, where the original magician is drowned while the new magician takes his place and lives his life continuing. So in short, if we are the beings experiencing the copying part, are we alive after it's done? Now this very clearly provides a great plot for those movies. Those are good movies. The Prestige is amazing. But I want to examine a different aspect of the Ship of Theseus before wrapping this whole thing up, hopefully. So far, we've considered replacing the planks of the ship with identical planks, or, to go to the analogy of replacing atoms with like atoms, and we know that that doesn't matter. But what if they weren't exactly the same at all? Suppose, for instance, instead of replacing a plank on the ship, we added a second mast. Is that still the same ship? And before you get too into the weeds with the analogy, let me just cut to the chase and give you the direction I'm going with this. Are you the same person today as you were when you were a child? Clearly, you have different memories today than you did then. But more than that, if we take materialism for granted here, the brain that we had as a child is physically different from the brain we have as an adult. This is no longer a case of replicating someone like we do in a transporter. We're talking about growth of a person, the plasticity of the mind. That stuff all changes. But let's limit it just to memories, because obviously memories alone suffice for this. Because if materialism is true, those memories have to be stored inside the brain. They don't exist outside of the brain. They have to be somewhere inside the brain, which means that a new memory does mean a different brain somewhere along the lines from what it was before. Now, in asking, are you the same person now as you were when you were a child? Obviously, we have a very strong bias in thinking that we are the same person, at least in our core identity, as we were when we were a child, because we feel as if we were the same person. How does that work? See, in point of fact, it appears to me that if identity is linked to the pattern of atoms, then it has to be a necessary truth that every individual time slice that we can make, which would be Planck's time or something similar, the object that constitutes me is different in relevant ways, at minimum because of those memories, as it was before. So to put it this way, the me that existed when I first began to speak this sentence has no memory of how this sentence was going to end, but the me that is speaking after the sentence is done does have that memory. My brain, therefore, is physically different. Thus, the pattern that I subjectively feel is me at every slice of time is actually a new and different pattern altogether, and thus not me. And that brings me back to the problems discussed in movies like The Prestige. If the current me only exists in a specific slice of time, is there some sense in which the me that started to speak this sentence right now has died and been obliterated and no longer exists, and is simply replaced with another new me by the time that I'm at the end of the sentence? It seems to me that if materialism is true, then that conclusion follows. Every slice of time, yeah, sure, a near replica is invented of the current me at that time, altered only by the memory of events that haven't appeared yet in that specific slice of time before that time. The pattern is updated in every tick of time in this example, but it is no longer the original pattern that it was before. It has changed. It is very close. Obviously, nothing, in fact, could be closer than the current tick is to the previous tick that came before it. But the pattern, nevertheless, is different. And so this brings the final question to wrap all this back together. If it is not the case that switching the atoms is what switches the identity of what the thing is, and if it's not the case that switching the pattern is what switches the identity of what the thing is, then what is what makes the things they are the way they are? There must be something which remains the same when these things change. Thus, I'm still the same person through each slice of time. But it can't be the atoms, and it can't be the pattern. So what is it? What is left? If I'm to argue that the same fundamental person today is me that was there yesterday or even 30 years ago, what is the basis for that claim? How can there be a basis if materialism is true? What is the basis for the sameness of the person who is there? Go ahead and share your thoughts if you have any ideas. In the meantime, I do hope you have a wonderful day, and peace out.